This meeting of the Senate Judiciary Committee will come to order. We have 12 judicial nominees on the agenda today who've been listed for the first time and will be held over according to the custom and practice of the Senate Judiciary Committee. And I'd like to read their names: Anthony Johnstone for the Ninth Circuit, Justice Maria Kahn for the Second, Julie Reichelman for the First Circuit, Judge Daniel Calabretta for the Eastern District of California, Matthew Garcia for the District of New Mexico, Judge Margaret Guzman for the District of Massachusetts, Judge Jeffrey Hopkins for the Southern District of Ohio, Lindsey Jenkins for the Northern District of Illinois, Araceli Martinez Olgan for the Northern District of California, Justice Adrian Nelson for the District of Oregon, Jamar Walker for the Eastern District of Virginia, and Jamal Whitehood for the Western District of Washington. We also have one bill on the agenda that's been listed for the first time and also will be held over. It's 2773, Unleashing of American Innovators Act of 2021. It was introduced by Senators Leahy, Tillis, and Hirono, and I look forward to taking it up at our next markup on December the 1st. Finally, we have 3 U.S. Attorney nominees and 1 U.S. Marshal nominee who are eligible for a vote today. I will turn to Ranking Member Grassley in a moment. But before I do, I want to speak briefly on an issue of national importance and personal importance to me, and that's the future of many young immigrants under the DREAM Act, or DACA. This week, Dreamers from across the country traveled to Washington to ask us to pass immigration reform legislation before the end of the year. These Dreamers are part of America, an important part. They're teachers and doctors, essential workers. They make our lives better every single day. And there are some amazing stories. There was a young dreamer yesterday who talked about how his life was at a dead end until DACA came along, and he was able to go to college. The story that followed is almost incredible. He not only succeeded to get a good professional job, he started creating companies, $1 million companies, this young man. He said last year he paid in taxes $180,000 to the federal government. That suggests life has been pretty good to him. He owed it all to DACA, he said. Before DACA, I didn't have any type of an avenue or plan that could lead to success, and now it has. And I reminded him that he was paying more in federal taxes than many successful U.S. corporations. It's one illustration of the determination and amazing ingenuity of many of these dreamers. How can we possibly run the risk of losing them and what they're going to bring to our country? I want to thank Senator Lindsey Graham for serving as the lead Republican co-sponsor of the DREAM Act over many years. Over a decade ago, when I appealed to President Obama to help, he created DACA. As we know, it's gone back and forth in the courts and waiting for us to decide what the law will be, which I hope we can do. Today, the DACA program is uncertain for the future. The time to act is now. I hope as soon as we get back from Thanksgiving, we can start a meaningful conversation about DACA and other critical areas of immigration. I would just say to Senator Grassley, he and I share agricultural states. The agriculture sector is begging us for the opportunity to bring in workers and immigrants. And the same thing is true when it comes to healthcare workers. In my state of Illinois and many states, it's a real serious problem. 2013, we worked on a bipartisan approach to this. It passed on the floor. It would have made our borders more secure, and I'm prepared to commit to that as well. We need to pass another comprehensive bill, or at least the best we can come up with in a matter of several weeks, and maybe beyond, but I hope in several weeks. Let me close by saying I've tried repeatedly to start conversations on bipartisan immigration. Sometimes the proper moment is just not there. I hope that when we return from Thanksgiving, it will be. I invite my Republican colleagues to sit down with us. I come to it with an open mind and prepared to help in any way I can. Senator Grassley?
Yeah. I'll start with a comment where you left off, and I probably wouldn't have said this if you hadn't said what you did. And by the way, I've taken a public position that DACA kids brought here by their parents are not illegal. Now, technically, under our law, they probably are illegally entering the country, but since they were brought here by their parents, I don't consider them to be illegally in the country. But I think one of the things that keeps us from passing any immigration legislation is the fact that the president has poisoned the waters of that discussion by not enforcing the law at the border that we see every day. And if he would make a commitment to enforce that law, and it would help that. But it's particularly disgusting when he says, well, I don't know whether the president says it, but people in the administration say the border is being enforced. And everybody knows that that's not true. You've already held over the judicial nominees. We can have a voice vote on the U.S. Attorney and U.S. Marshal. Now, I'm going to get into something that's oversight, but it's not just oversight of Democrat Department justices, it's oversight of past Republican Department of Justice. So this is not a partisan situation. I sent a letter October 5th this year to the Justice Department and the FBI. That letter is based upon whistleblower disclosures about widespread sexual misconduct at the FBI. In that letter, I noted one FBI document that I've made public, which shows 665 FBI employees retired or resigned to avoid punishment for their misconduct between 2004 and 2020. That includes 45 senior executive service employees. Another FBI document that I've made public shows the FBI is aware of higher graded employees receiving lesser punishment than lower graded employees for similar misconduct. The document shows a systemic failure within the Justice Department and the FBI to put a stop to sexual harassment and misconduct in the workplace. The documents show a failure to sufficiently punish employees for that same misconduct. I've asked the Justice Department and the FBI for more data and for them to explain themselves. They have failed to respond. So on November 2 this year, I requested the Justice Department Inspector General review and investigate these and related matters. I fully expect an update from the Inspector General and for him to take action. Now going forward, Chairman Durbin and I have agreed to join forces with respect to investigating these FBI sexual misconduct issues next Congress. We're also working together to investigate similar misconduct at the Department of Homeland Security, which will continue into the next Congress. These are important bipartisan investigations, and I look forward to jointly pursuing them. As I'm sure everyone here would agree, Congress has an obligation to perform an objective and independent review of these serious government failures and create positive change. Government employees shouldn't have to suffer under daily abuse and misconduct by their colleagues and supervisors. Lastly, as I often say, our doors are always open for more whistleblowers to give us further information. I yield.
Senator Grassley, you've really distinguished yourself on this committee when it comes to oversight work. You and I may disagree from time to time, but when it comes to matters that we work on together, I think it brings out the best in the committee. As we look back over the last 2 years, who can forget when the Olympic gymnasts came before this committee, a bipartisan hearing on the FBI's dereliction of duty in the Larry Nassar investigation. And for the past 7 months, Senator Grassley, you and I have investigated allegations that you just referred to, that Inspector General Joseph Kafari suppressed evidence of widespread sexual harassment and misconduct at the Department of Homeland Security. We're going to continue working with the Inspector General to address these questions and answers as well when it comes to DHS, and I know you mentioned that. I'm proud to partner with you in this bipartisan investigation, and I hope that we can reach some valuable conclusions that will be helpful to the people who have been victimized. Today, we have 3 U.S. attorneys.
Mr. Chairman, before we go on to the next piece of
Yes,
business, could I
Senator
respond
Whitehouse,
to
of course.
Chairman Grassley? Because I want to echo the concerns that Senator Grassley expressed. I think for a long time, a lot of us have experienced a very negative and unresponsive attitude within the Department of Justice to getting questions answered. I have questions that have been out there for years, still left unanswered. We also see highly questionable OLC opinions that relate to their obligation to turn over information and its confidentiality, which have been maintained by the OLC after those same arguments were trotted out in court and shot down in Article III courts. Yet they're still on the books at the Department of Justice and evidently still being followed by the department. And most recently, a number of us asked the GAO to do an investigation of why we were getting such poor response from the Department of Justice. And the GAO reported back that there were systemic failures within the department to even track the requests from members of Congress so that they could know which ones had been answered or had not. And so I just wanted to flag for the members of the committee that that GAO report is out and available, and I hope that the department will at least solve the problem, the systemic problems about tracking and responding to us based on the GAO recommendations.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cornyn, then Senator Hirono, I believe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Not Senator Ossoff.
I look forward to voting on the U.S. Attorney nominees, but first, since the chairman brought up the deferred action on childhood arrivals issue, otherwise known as the Dreamers, I wanted to just say a few words about that. I still remember being part of Republican leadership meeting with President Obama in the White House and begging him not to try to deal with these young people who came here as children in the company of their adult parents who entered the country illegally, but to give Congress a chance to deal with it. That was 10 years ago. President Obama, after saying, I believe it was somewhere around 12, I know it was double digits, he said, I don't have the authority to do this. But then he did it. And what happened is, you know, it's been in litigation now for 10 years. Finally, the Judge Hainan in the Southern District of Texas has rendered the judgment which agrees with President Obama when he said he didn't have the authority to do it. That's now in the Fifth Circuit, and I expect, either it has been affirmed or I expect it to be soon. But this is entirely predictable and entirely avoidable. But I'm disappointed. I think Senator Tillis and I were the ones who wrote a letter to you, Mr. Chairman, saying only the chairman can schedule a markup of a bill. And yet we haven't had any markup of any bill dealing with the Dreamers during the times that Democrats have controlled the House, the Senate, and the White House. I've made public statements that if we had a narrow bill that provided some certainty and some relief to these young people who, through no fault of their own, now find themselves in uncertain and unpredictable times, that I would support that. But I agree with Senator Grassley that given the Biden border crisis of the last 2 years and the influx of millions of people across the border and the refusal of the Biden administration and our Democratic colleagues to deal with that, it's untenable for us to be passing any immigration bills that don't address that fundamental problem of border insecurity. I've said this time and time again. I don't know whether anybody pays attention, but it's not just the migrants that are coming across. Yes, many of them are economic migrants, but some of them are criminals. Some of them are smuggling drugs into the United States. 108,000 Americans died of drug overdoses last year. In your communities, each of our communities, in each of our states, 71,000 of those died of fentanyl overdoses, synthetic opioids that are the precursors of which come from China and come to Mexico and then up across the border. The same broken border that lets economic migrants and other people come across allows drugs to be smuggled into the United States. It's part of the cartel business model, and it works. And they are continuing to get enormously rich off the suffering of not only many of the migrants that they abuse in the process, but the American families who lose children to fentanyl overdoses. So I just think while it is unfair and unjust, I think, for these DACA recipients to be left hanging, that's something that President Obama did 10 years ago, and something that our Democratic colleagues could have cured if the chairman would have been willing to bring a bill for a markup in the committee. But I agree with Senator Grassley that given the fact that the border is on fire and the American people are irate and entirely justified in being irate by this self-inflicted border crisis due to the inaction of the Biden administration, I just don't see a path forward at this time.
Before recognizing Senator Rono, I'd like to say a word. Yes, I did send a letter to President Obama and ask him to find a way to deal with the Dreamers. I did that after we had brought the DREAM Act to the floor of the Senate and it had been filibustered. We were unable to get the 60 votes necessary. And he tried clearly to establish a mechanism by executive order that gave some protection to these young people, and it has been transformative and life-changing in its circumstance. I think it's still up to us to find something that could survive a filibuster that resolves this in a more permanent fashion for their sake and for the sake of our country, which desperately needs their talents. I'd like to say a word, if I can, about fentanyl and the drugs coming across the border. This fiscal year, CBP has seized 656,000 pounds of drugs. 656,000 pounds of drugs, Customs and Border Patrol. Only 112,000 pounds, 17%, were seized by the Border Patrol. The rest was seized by the Office of Field Operations, who man the ports of entry. By a ratio of nearly 6 to 1, drugs are flowing in the United States through ports of entry. The notion of some cantaloupe-calved messengers who are bringing in these drugs through the border is largely anecdotal and apocryphal. I think that what it boils down to is we need to do both. But let's start where the most serious problem is. Let's make the ports of entry much more responsive to the drugs that are being seized and are passing through. We can do it with technology. When I was on part of the bipartisan comprehensive immigration reform group, we voted for billions and billions of dollars for border security. It isn't as if I'm opposed to it. I'm for it. And I think we can reduce the drug flow into the United States in that fashion. In terms of any negotiations and discussions on DACA, as I mentioned to you personally, Senator, I'm more than happy to sit down and entertain any proposal from Democrat or Republicans that might lead us to a conclusion on this in near term.
Mr. Chairman, may I just briefly take 30 seconds to respond? I applaud efforts to harden, so to speak, the ports of entry. There are a lot of drugs that do come across the ports of entry, and God bless the men and women of the Customs and Border Protection that interdict those drugs on a daily basis. But they don't get it all. No. And indeed, there are hundreds of thousands of migrants that are the so-called gotaways that are running away from law enforcement because many of them are transporting drugs into the United States in backpacks. And so I just think that we've talked about these issues for a long time, ever since I've been in the Senate. I know the chairman is proud of the work that he and others did in the Gang of Eight. I think it was eight, and the bill that passed the Senate, but it didn't pass the House. It's not law. I think we can't keep sort of living in the past and saying, well, if we'd just done that way back when, things would be better, because it didn't get done. And so we need to live in the present and deal with the present challenges and problems that are confronted by a failure of policy and a failure of administration by the Biden administration when it comes to security of the border. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your continuing efforts to pass legislation that will help 800,000 DACA participants stay in this country without the fear of deportation continuously hanging over their heads. Yes, we did mark up a bill that would enable DACA participants to stay in our country, among other things. It was called the Comprehensive Immigration Bill. Under the leadership of Chairman Leahy, it's the first major bill that I had an opportunity to work on as a member of this committee when I was first elected. We did have provisions relating to DACA. We did mark it up. It took about 2 weeks of markup on that very important bill. And yes, it did not get the attention it needed to get in the House, but that doesn't mean that the tremendous amount of work in a bipartisan way that enabled that bill to pass the Senate, it does not mean that we should not hearken to that time when we were able to work together and to continue to hold the DACA participants, a number of whom will be coming to the Capitol this week, in fact, today, to visit a number of us, but to continue to hold the DACA participants hostage because we cannot address the comprehensive issues around what is happening in our border, the drugs that come into our country. To hold these people hostage is to continue what is acknowledged by my Republican colleagues as an unjust, unfair situation. Why do we continue to let such a situation happen? It is up to us to make that change. And I would ask all of my Republican colleagues, let's turn the page already. 800,000 DACA participants have been asking us to do that for 10 years. Enough. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Hirono. Senator Ossoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I share many of Senator Cornyn's concerns about the insecurity of a southern border, and I share his conviction that the status quo for those who were brought to this country as children is unfair and unjust. And when something is unfair and unjust, we've got an obligation to take action. And I submit respectfully to my colleagues that I'm hearing the same debate that Americans have heard for 15 years or more. Recriminations about who did what a decade ago. Water under the bridge while something unfair and unjust persists. And I just want to share a story that really touched my heart. Earlier this week, we held a hearing in the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations in the Homeland Security Committee, Senator Cornyn. And Senator Johnson of Wisconsin and I had worked together for 18 months to investigate the medical mistreatment of women in DHS immigration detention. And as you know, Senator Johnson can hardly be described as a dove on immigration policy, but he and I worked together to investigate the mistreatment of women in U.S. detention. And we heard the courageous testimony of a young woman named Karina, Senator, who testified before of a subcommittee about her experience. She'd been brought to the U.S. when she was 8 years old. She started working when she was 15. Brought from Mexico when she was 8 years old. Started working when she was 15. At 18, she was in an abusive marriage. She called the police to her home after being attacked by her spouse 4 months after her daughter had been born. She wound up getting arrested, not her partner who had attacked her. And all the charges were dropped because she wasn't at fault, but because she lacked documents. She wound up for 9 months in immigration detention in Ocilla, Georgia. She was still breastfeeding her baby. 4-month-old infant daughter. Abusive spouse at home. She's forcibly separated from her 4-month-old baby. Locked in detention, where she winds up getting sent to an OBGYN doctor who, according to the bipartisan findings that Senator Johnson and I produced, subjected dozens, if not hundreds, of women in U.S. detention to invasive, unnecessary, dangerous gynecological surgeries and other procedures. It's one of the most horrific cases we've investigated in that subcommittee this year. My point is this: human beings are suffering as we speak in this room, as the same debates we've had for 15, 20 years are rehashed, relitigated, the same talking points. I mean no disrespect, but it's the same, I'm new here, it's the same thing everyone's been saying in this exact room for 2 decades. In the real world, mothers are being ripped from 4-month-old infant breastfeeding daughters and sent to detention because they were brought here when they were 8 years old. So for God's sake, if we can summon the political courage, all of us, not addressing any one side of the aisle here, just so we can summon the political courage to do what's right here, to do what we've all acknowledged is an unjust, unfair situation. We're the only people in the country with the power to solve it. So let's solve it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Klobuchar.
Appreciate the thoughtful remarks of my colleague, Senator Ossoff, as well as his work on his committee. I'm just thinking back, as you mentioned time and time again, we've had these arguments, but I'm thinking back to actually when we reached agreements on this. Senator Leahy knows what I'm talking about. We, under President Bush, were able to reach an agreement on immigration reform, but then the bill failed on the Senate floor. And we worked so hard on that. I was a brand new senator, and Senator Whitehouse and I remember were invited by Senator McCain and Senator Kennedy to be part of it. Fast forward to President Obama. Now we make an even bigger moment. We actually get a bill through the Senate floor on comprehensive reform. Then during President Trump, we have a group led by Mike Rounds, and we make an agreement on Dreamers, and then unfortunately we get gut punched on it. And that was a bipartisan agreement. I'm just looking at the clock ticking right now, and I'm thinking this is it. We've got till the end of the year. We know the changes in the politics in the House. We know there's some interest on both sides of the aisle on this. Senator Durbin has so valiantly led us for years and years to finally get something done on Dreamers, to perhaps do something on the business visa issues and some of the issues that we're having with workers coming in. My state has the lowest unemployment rate in the country. It's slowing us down if we don't do anything. Many people know what I'm talking about. And then figuring out something at the border. If we could do this, this is our moment. And I think we all know this is our moment. So I'm just hoping our colleagues will share our concerns, whether it is from an economic standpoint, a business standpoint, a moral standpoint, as my friend Senator Ossoff just expressed, security standpoint, you name it. We have this moment where we could actually, and people are like, why could you do this in 4 weeks? Well, because we've been negotiating this, as pointed out by the brand new Senator Ossoff, for many, many years before he got here. We know what all the politics are. We know what the points of agreement are. We've made these agreements before. So why don't we just get this done? What a gift to the American people if we could get this done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Klobuchar. Senator Duckworth is asked to submit a statement for the record in support of David Davis, the Southern District of Illinois Marshal nominee. Without objection, I'll have that statement placed in the record. Senator Leahy.
Mr. Chairman, this brings back so many memories, what Senator Klobuchar said, what Senator Cornyn, you have said. Nobody's spoken more fervently for Dreamers than you have over the years. You've had them in the here at the Capitol. You've made sure.
Could you speak up?
You've had them here in the Capitol. You've had them I know times when I was chairman, you brought some to meet with me. And we did put together a bipartisan group, worked, well, I can remember some late nights we worked doing it. We did get enough votes to pass it in the Senate, and then it got blocked in the other body. I think for all the wrong reasons. And I know how disappointed you and everybody else were. I do think, as a grandson of immigrants from Italy, I think of what these people are facing and immigrants now, and it's far more difficult than my grandparents faced when they came to Vermont from Italy with a different language and certainly different views on things than most of the people around them. But they came here, started their own business, saw their grandson become the first one to go to graduate from college. And I think of that all the time when I'm voting here. I wish there was some way. But it's going to require the same kind of bipartisan effort that we had before. Now, I'm only going to be here a few more weeks, but I know things can happen. I know that from 48 years' experience here. Mr. Chairman, I'll follow your lead, but I'm willing to spend any amount of time in the remaining weeks I have here to work on something. Because it is, we have children of immigrants on this committee. We all have people who are immigrants who have worked in our offices or in our states. And this should be the country of promise, not a country of closed doors.
Thank you, Senator Leahy, and of course, the record of the committee will reflect the historic markup we had on that immigration bill. There were hundreds of amendments filed and scores of amendments actually debated and voted on, and your leadership made the difference. Senator Feinstein?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I come obviously from the biggest state, large importation of people, connections on borders, all of that. I think we need to take a good look at what we're doing. I think it might be wise to hold a series of hearings and have some people come in and really express to us what the situation is at the borders, on the program level, and on the staff level. Because it's such a controversial subject that historically, really looking at it periodically has kind of been shunned, and we don't do it officially. So my suggestion would be that we hold a series of hearings on immigration law as it is today, the numbers coming in, and how that law is handled.
Thank you, Senator Feinstein. We have 3 U.S. Attorney nominees on the agenda today. I understand we can take an en bloc voice vote on those 3.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Cornyn?
I look forward to supporting on them and I would agree to a voice vote. Can I just say a couple words about one of the nominees? Particularly proud of, and that's Leah Simonton, the nominee for the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Texas. Ms. Simonton graduated from the University of Texas undergrad and from Yale Law School, and then after law school clerked for the Fifth Circuit for Judge Patrick Higginbotham, and then for Judge Barbara Lynn of the U.S. District Court of the Northern District of Texas. She's worked in the private practice before moving over to the U.S. Attorney's Office, where she's been ever since, and currently serves as the district's appellate chief and supervises all appellate work coming from that entire district. In her time, she's supervised and handled 370 appeals. And I have no doubt Ms. Simonton will do a great job as U.S. Attorney. Her experience, demeanor, and judgment and leadership will serve the district well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Cornyn. Senator Ossoff, do you have any statement to be made for Peter Leary?
I thank the committee in advance for bipartisan support for this outstanding nominee to be U.S. Attorney in Middle District, Georgia, and appreciate that the President took my and Senator Warnock's recommendation to put him forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is there anyone who wishes to speak on these nominations? On favorably reporting Leary, Schneider, and Simonton nominations, I'm speaking as loud as I can, Senator. On favorably reporting the Leary, Schneider, and Simonton nominations, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. The majority of members present, having voted in the affirmative, the ayes have it. Nominations will be favorably reported to the floor. Do any members wish to be recorded as no?
I have these requests. Senator Lee would like to be recorded as no on Schneider, and Senator Hawley would like to be recorded as no on Larry, Schneider, and Davis, and Senator Blackburn would like to be recorded as no on Larry and Schneider.
Without objection, the votes will be, will note the changes requested by Senator Grassley. I'm pausing and hesitating because we're waiting for one colleague to arrive. He had a meeting at the State Department. He's in traffic, and I hope he can be here soon. I would like to have his presence before we take the final vote, or some other member appears. So
As long as you have two.
I'm going to read a statement in the record and hope that that is enough time. Before turning the final vote, let me speak to David Davis, nominated to U.S. Marshal for the Southern District of Illinois, career law enforcement professional, 2 decades with the U.S. Marshal's Service, joined the U.S. Marshal Service in 1994, served as United States Marshal from 94 to 2004, criminal investigator to 2014, supervisor of the Deputy U.S. Marshals from 2014 to 2016. Since 2017, Mr. Davis has served as task officer for the Illinois State Police Department. He's recommended by a screening committee that Senator Duckworth and I established. That committee has done an outstanding job in recommending Mr. Davis, and I want to thank all of the committee members for their hard work. Retired federal judge Pat Murphy chairs the committee. He's a terrific chairman and contributed himself quite a bit to the cause of justice, along with Ebony Huddleston, Judge Bruce Stewart, Steve Stone, and Lois Wood. I want to thank Mr. Davis for his continued willingness to serve and look forward to supporting his nomination. Is there any other person seeking to speak at this moment? I'm going to hold for just in the hopes that Senator Coons appears.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator
while we're
Cornyn?
waiting, can I just respond to what Senator Feinstein said?
Sure, of course.
I think, those of us who've been here a while have been talking about immigration off and on for a long, long time. But we've had a number of senators join us who maybe weren't part of that discussion way back when. And the dynamic at the border has changed in recent years. It is not the same as what it used to be, and mainly what you had coming across were economic migrants from Central America and Mexico. Now the Border Patrol will encounter people from 150-plus different countries, because the nature of illegal immigration is this is an international network of human smuggling, and you get people from all sorts of different nationalities, including countries of particular concern when it comes to terrorism and the like. So I think Senator Feinstein is really onto something, that we would benefit maybe from a series of hearings on different aspects of the immigration issue and the nature of the problems being encountered by Border Patrol and Customs and Border Protection. And I think that may well provide us some insight into where common ground exists. I agree with Senator Ossoff. Those of us who've been around here a while tend to lapse into some of our same old talking points, and we might just learn something, and that might provide an opportunity for us to come up, if not some broad bill, at least some areas where we find common ground where we can legislate. Just an idea.
Thank you, Senator Corner. And I'll just say this, I am not opposed at all to hearings, but I do hope if we have a chance and an opening that we seize this opportunity in the next few weeks to see what we can achieve, if anything. And I know you've pledged to look at it in good faith, and I will too. And let's proceed from there. Now that we have two more senators present, just for the record, I'm going to ask once again to take the vote on favorably reporting the Larry, Schneider, and Simonton nominations. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The majority of the members present having voted in the affirmative, the ayes have it, and the no votes that were announced by Senator Grassley just a few moments ago will once again be part of the record without objection. Now, on favor of reporting the nomination of David C. Davis to be U.S. Marshal for the Southern District of Illinois, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. Those opposed, no. The majority of members present having voted in the affirmative, the ayes have it. Nomination will be favorably reported. Do you have any votes? No?
I think, weren't they covered by all just for the record, I'll state them all again.
Could you use your mic, please?
Senator Lee would be recorded no on Schneider. Senator Hawley would like to be recorded no on Larry, Schneider, and Davis. And Senator Blackburn, no on Larry and Schneider.
Senators will be so reported. With that, this meeting of the Senate Judiciary Committee stands adjourned.